why don't I give you like a brief rundown of my history a little bit, and that would probably spur some questions about like, why did you do that?
Awesome, yeah.
So, okay, cool. So you guys probably know my name is Jessie, and I'll go all the way back to the beginning, basically. So I started my first business when I was in high school, and it was really simple. It was printing T-shirts, and there was nothing like specifically innovative about it. It was just like I bought a simple screen printing machine, and I put it in my parents' basement, and I was like screen printing shirts. They weren't that cool. Like they were just like basic T-shirts. I don't think I was like that good at printing, so they turned out okay. But I sold them to my friends and stuff. And but then I always like had this bug to try to make something into a little bit more like than it was. And I'm probably a little bit like OCD. Like once I get into something, it's really hard to stop. It's just like a never-ending kind of train of thought. And in some ways, like from that moment to now, it's just like a never-ending adventure. Like like in my mind, it's felt like one big long career trajectory, even though it's changed over the course of time, like really significantly. But I started this little T-shirt company, and I like when I was printing, I got fascinated. So in high school, I was printing T-shirts, and I was also in a photography 101 class, just like a basic photo class. And we had a dark room. I was lucky enough that my high school had a dark room, and I would go to this dark room, and again, it was printmaking. I was kind of fascinated with printing. And I go into this dark room, and I walk out with like these beautiful photo prints after just turning on a light bulb. You know, it's an incredible process. And at the same time, I was at home, like struggling through screen printing, and an idea kind of came to me. I was like, why can't I do this beautiful photo process but on fabric? Like, why am I struggling at home to like squeegee ink through a frame and all this when like this beautiful process that I turn on a light bulb is like happening in a dark room? And my first thought was not like I will create something from scratch. My first thought was like, of course someone's already done this. Like, and that I think is an important part of the story. Like from the outside looking in at like, you know, seemingly good ideas or something, a lot of times you're like, how did that person come up with that? Like it seems so crazy. And usually it's just a cascade of thought. Like usually it's very rare that someone wakes up and they're like, I have a genius idea. Like it's more likely, in my case with the printing, that I just assumed someone had already done that. And then the more and more I looked into it, I realized that someone hadn't done it. And I thought maybe I could figure it out. And I didn't even know if I could figure it out. And that was the beginning of researching and coming up with the Inco Dye product line, which is what I was on Shark Tank to promote, you know, many, many years later. And I had like, the story gets like really crazy. I started, you know, printing, my T-shirts got like a little bit better when I was in high school, and I actually convinced my parents to let me come out to Los Angeles for the summer between my junior and senior year. No, my sophomore and junior year of high school. And I stayed with a family friend, and I took my T-shirts like store to store on Melrose Avenue, which is just this like shopping street here in LA. And I was just like, hey, like I didn't know the first thing about sales. I didn't know anything, but I would just walk into these stores and I'd be like, can I speak to someone who like does buying? And like, I was probably so terrible at all of it, but I got a couple of stores to buy these random T-shirts, and I think that the core thing that did for me was, again, I was still a teenager, and it kind of made me understand that the business world is way more open than you think. Like, again, you kind of look at things from a distance, and you're like, clothing that's in stores and products that are in stores and all this stuff, like, how does this stuff happen? It feels so far from your life. Like, you don't know how it all happens. But if you jump in and you actually just start asking people, like, literally just even in the store, like, how did, you know, does someone do your buying in the store, or do you have a corporate office, or like, you just start asking questions, you learn pretty fast that it's less mysterious than it seems. It still doesn't mean they want what you have. Like, there's no guarantee of that. But at least, like, you'll start to unravel the mysteries of it. So I did that, and it was a really cool experience to have, like, it's just a couple of stores. I didn't really make any real money off it, but it was cool to be like, I had this idea, I made a few shirts, I put them in a store, like, it felt very real, you know? And along the same, all of that time, like, while I was, like, finishing high school and going into early college and stuff, I was still had this idea in the back of my mind about, like, what if you could do this different type of printing? And I was really just researching it the whole time. And I think that is another fun element of the story. Is like, I was researching it for like several years and made like very little progress. But I never gave up on it entirely. And it sounded like a really kooky idea. Like, it didn't sound like a big business idea, or it didn't sound very cool. Like, I want to figure out how to print photography on fabric. Like, even when you explain it, it just sounds kind of complicated and weird. So at various junctures, it would have been very easy to just be like, this isn't cool, like, it was a random idea I had, and I'm going to stop working on it. But the kind of persistence of, like, never letting it completely go, you know, pays off in the long term. And I think it's really good to have that kind of tenacity, because in getting to know a lot of different entrepreneurs, honestly, the biggest thing that separates people is their ability to stick to the ability to never give up and, like, stick to a certain trajectory. It doesn't always mean sticking to an exact idea, because you might learn that your idea changes, or you figure out something that makes it better. So it's not important to just, like, hold on to an idea and never give up, but it's important to, like, never be like, oh, I'm over that phase. Like, it's important to just keep on going, like, what comes next. So through kind of a crazy series of events, I actually did figure out this, like, chemistry of how you could make a fabric dye that develops its color in the sun. And it was a multi-year process, because it just, even when I describe it, sounds insane, but that's kind of the nature of like entrepreneurialism. But I found out that something very similar to what I was looking for, I found a reference to it in an old book. It was like in this photo caption about printmaking, and it had a name, and the name was Inco dye. And it turns out that this substance, kind of like called Inco dye, had been used in the 1950s for a very different purpose, actually, but it had this photosensitive quality to it. And it took me like another year from that time to actually figure out who knew anything about it, because it was like a completely defunct thing. Like, all I had was this one little reference in a book. And through another year, I ended up tracking down this guy who's retired, who knew the original owners, and still had a lot of information about Inco dye. And again, through kind of crazy, you know, just communicating with him all the time, I ended up convincing him that since no one was making money off Inco dye anymore, that I should, for a pretty small sum of money, buy the formula and try to create something with it. And that was, at that point, I had now moved out to California, and I was going to school for industrial design at a school called Art Center in Pasadena. It's like an industrial design college. And again, like, so my normal life, like, I think that's the important lesson too. Like, normal life just keeps going. Like, I finished high school. I had to figure out college. It's stressful, just like everyone else. Like, all of that keeps going. Like, life never takes a break for you to, like, build a business, you know? So I go to college, but at the same time, I was still working on this, like, just weekends and just, like, pushing things forward. And at Art Center, I met my co-founder. His name is Stefan. He also is studying industrial design. And we decided that I told him about this, like, dorky dye thing I had been working on. And he was like, this is so cool. And he said, I just learned about this new thing that launched a few months ago. It's called Kickstarter. And this was in 2009. And Kickstarter was literally 3 months old, and no one knew what it was. It was just like when you hear about random things that launch online, like, no traction, no one knew what it was. But we decided, like, we were still in school, and we were like, this would be so cool. Like, let's come up with a campaign and launch it around this kind of crazy concept and see what happens. So we did that, and it was a success. Kickstarter was so small back then. Our goal was $12,000. We raised $13,000, and at the time, it was the largest campaign on Kickstarter ever.
Wow.
Yeah, in 2009, because the other campaigns were like $1,000, like $500 for like I'm making a song or something. So we were the founders of Kickstarter. Perry and Yancey called us to congratulate us on the campaign, and we ended up becoming friends with them. And I think, and all of this stuff is kind of a cool, like a cool story as well. In like that will only happen once. Like Kickstarter, these things, like kind of being there at the moment when certain things are launching and stuff, that only happens once. But the cool thing about life is that those moments happen all the time. There's new things launching all the time to use. Soon, in 5 years, people will be using something else to launch businesses or to, communicate their ideas. So, so I would like to share those things, but they're not meant to like breed any nostalgia at all, because like you'll be doing something new. Like that's the whole point, kind of like pushing things forward. So yeah, we launched this Kickstarter, and it showed us like that we could do something in the business world, that people are actually willing to like ante up some money to buy like this thing that we had created. And at the time, we weren't actually selling the dye. We weren't ready. And this begins the trajectory of kind of the business world is complicated. Every product has regulations and hurdles, and these are the reasons why certain things make it to market and other things don't. At the time, like there's a lot of regulation actually around art supplies because they're used by kids and stuff, so we didn't actually have the first clue of how to bring ink or dye, the dye, like to market. So the first thing we did was actually just sell printed goods. Like our first Kickstarter campaign, we sold printed wallets, printed stuff that we made with ink or dye because we didn't know how to sell the dye. And that was 2009. And so flash forward to 2012, and we had figured that whole thing out. We were manufacturing ink or dye at the time, and like we used to make it in bowls and then buckets. Now we make it in 55-gallon drums. And we figured out how to make it. And we also figured out the basics of the kind of regulatory hurdles to put it on the market. That's kind of a never-ending adventure because, we figured out the basics, which allowed us to sell online. Selling it to retailers required a whole new set of like testing and things than just selling it online. So we figured out the basics, and that campaign in 2012, where we released our first kit, allowed us to, that campaign raised over $250,000, and so that gave us a really big boost and then we went into retail from there with the product. I think that it's important to like touch on the fact that I really think that 2012 campaign, yes, it's a cool product, like developed as color and sunlight and everything else, but I think that the reason that campaign went so well was because we put some heart into telling our story. Like when I see campaigns that do really well, it's usually because people took the time to explain like why they're so passionate about what they're doing. And the world, especially in communities like Kickstarter and stuff, really responds to that more than like just having a flashy idea. And I think that there's a tendency when you're just starting to want to seem bigger than you are, and to want to and to not want to expose your vulnerabilities, like how important something is to you, or like how if you don't succeed in your campaign, it might not exist. Like, you kind of hesitate about sharing that stuff, but usually it's a good idea. Like, it's not the same as you're not trying to be self-aggrandizing, like but it's important to kind of like help people feel like they're on the adventure with you type of thing. So that campaign marked a really big moment for us, but of course that was like 3 years ago. And we took the product into retail stores. Using the success of the Kickstarter helped show retailers that there was some demand, because retailers want to be able to see that people want what you have before they buy it and put it on their shelves. And so that campaign helped prove that a little bit, so it made it easier for us to get into retail stores. Kind of flashing through the story again, like we spent then a few years just building the ink or dye product, and we made an app for it, and we made kits. We really kept, we did really smart colors, all sorts of things. And from there, we Well, one, so that you know, we manufactured ink dye, and we still do. Like behind me is like this industrial building. We make the dye ourselves. We package it, we kit it, we ship it. So we learned a lot about being like a small business manufacturer, and a lot of our customers are also designers and entrepreneurs. And so we um, we learned the challenges of like being a small manufacturer, and and it inspired us to create this new version of Lumi that we have launched this year, which is just now housed on Lumi.com, which is an ability for entrepreneurs and designers to upload their logos and their graphics to our online platform on Lumi.com, and then very easily order things like rubber stamps, things like custom mailers. We're going to be launching custom boxes, custom tape, like things that we learned are very, very hard to get as a small business. And so now we're kind of taking everything we learned about manufacturing and running a business and turning it into something, like turning into the next kind of adventure for Lumi. So yeah, I just condensed 10 years of my life into, a few minutes. But I hope that gives you an understanding. And now I'm happy to like answer any questions you guys have about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you first for going through all that so quickly. That helps a lot. I'm sure kids that are going to be watching this, we're actually recording this because some students are in class and everything, so I'm sure a lot of kids are interested in how you started, so thank you for that. And going back to the manufacturing question, I guess I know a lot of students on campus are really interested in their own ventures and have ideas and things like that, but there's some kids that are more app focused, there's some that are more consumer product focused. So where did you go, or where did you start for looking for your facility or your warehouse, like for manufacturing? Like what would you tell someone that maybe has done the prototype or maybe is on their way to making the prototype but wants a bigger facility, I guess, to make it?
That's a really good question. I mean, we started Lumi in Stefan's laundry room. We paid his roommate an extra $50 a month for the inconvenience of us taking over the laundry room, because they like had to do laundry like only at night because we were in there all day. So I would say like it's really good to choose something that fits where you're at. Space, and then the other thing you can do is there's a few phases that we did. Like we worked with like really cheap spaces at first. The second whole phase, which is a few years, we lived in the spaces. We went and we got lofts, like here in downtown. Well, not in downtown quite, but anyway, like around LA, and we lived in them, and that was one of the ways that we could afford it. So it was like we didn't have personal rent. We were able to write the full rent into the business, but we could never have afforded to like live somewhere else and have the business space and everything. So, and then finally, like the business was growing and we were able to get space. So I think it's important to do something that works for where you're at, and also realize that sacrifices might have to be made to get where you want to go.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I had a question regarding like how you can like funded your business at the start and like through the progression. So you mentioned that like the first biggest campaign you had was through the Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
And then one of the ways that we got to know you was from like going on Shark Tank and trying to obtain venture funding there. Could you kind of describe what that process is like, taking a business from nothing and growing it up to something where, at one point in your life asking for $1,000 was really hard, and now asking for $100,000 is something you do?
Yeah. Yes, again, I really hold the belief that, like you'll hear a lot of people talk about how doing things one way or another, or certain types of funding are bad and others are good. I am very holistic about the way I think about business. I think that nothing is good or bad unless it's clearly bad, unless it's clearly like a someone who you don't want to do business with. But I think that there's several ways to get funding in a really early stage business. And an excellent one is crowdfunding. Obviously, one of the reasons we know it's all excellent is that you are not taking a loan, so you do not have to pay it back. And then additionally, no one owns a piece of what you're doing. Those two things are very liberating. And so if your project makes sense for crowdfunding, that could be excellent. Some projects do and some projects don't. And again, that's not bad or good. It just depends on what you're up to. Another thing that you can do is loans. Like, loans in the scheme of things are an inexpensive way to get money. People, a lot of times it's very attractive to take investment money because it seems quote unquote free. Of course, nothing is free. You know, when you take money from an investor, they expect ultimately, usually in the scope of 3 to 7 years, they expect multiples of their money back. So if they give you 100,000, they're going to expect 300 or 500. Whereas if you took a bank loan for 100, the bank is only going to expect 120,000 back, or 100, you know, because it's just interest rates. So in relationship, those two things, like the investment is much more expensive over the course of time. But of course, the difficulty with a bank loan is that if you default on it, you personally are bankrupt. Whereas if you do, you know, there's no such thing as defaulting on an equity investment unless you have unless it includes a personal guarantee. Which, if an angel investor is asking for that, they probably are inexperienced. And if someone's asking for a personal guarantee on an investment, you should really consider a bank loan because they're very similar at that point. So I think that there's these different ways. And then another way that happens a lot, more than people talk about, is putting money on credit cards. It does not sound attractive. It sounds scary, and it is. But a lot of cool businesses have started that way. And if you're disciplined about it, similarly, it can actually be a very inexpensive way of starting a business if in 6 months or less, you feel like you can get a little bit of money coming in. If you feel like your idea is going to take years, credit cards are not the way to go. I think in terms of getting comfortable with it, the best advice I have is just to rip the Band-Aid off. Like, one of the pet peeves I have with watching some Kickstarter campaigns is that they never ask me for money. Like, I'm not there to watch a pretty video. Like, you know, if you're on a platform like that and you're just like, my hopes and dreams are this, and blah 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 blah, and I made a really cool backpack, like, and then the campaign just like ends. I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, you know, you have to have the guts to say, like, I made a cool backpack because I'm the king of backpacks and I need $20 from you to make my dream come true. Like, you have to say it out loud. And at first it's uncomfortable, but then if you have confidence in what you're doing, it just gets more and more comfortable. And there's no better advice I have than that, really.
Well, I'm the one who's kind of pioneering this club on campus, and so creativity is really important to me, and your business is obviously very creative, not only in what it sells, but definitely like the steps you've taken to make it happen. So how would you personally just define creativity?
That's a great question. That's a big question. How would I define creativity? So for me, you know, there's a lot of ways to approach that question, but I would say for me, it's definitely like an elasticity or like flexibility in your way of thinking. There's actually, maybe our psychology friends here can help us. There's a psychological principle. I think it's called like object fixation. Object permanence. Yeah. So basically, like, I think I'm getting this right. You can correct me completely if I'm wrong. But basically, you know, the idea that, like, you look at something, like, I'm trying to think, okay, like, this is such a silly example, but, like, you know, you look at a key and and like, non-creative people are like, you ask them, what can this do? And they're like, it can open one lock, like, that's what it can do. And then you ask someone else, like, what it can do, and they're like, well, I could stab someone with it. I could, like, you know, I could open a box, and I could do this, and I could do that. And I think that is a really key type of thinking to entrepreneurship, is like, you know, because you have so few tools at first. Like, you have your own personal time, and you have, like, scant resources, and you have to ask yourself, like, you have to do magicianship. What can you make with that stuff that actually has like value in the world? And so to me, that's creativity. It's like, you have to be flexible and elastic and create a lot from a little.
Awesome.
Very inspiring.
You like when I'm stabbing people with keys, I'm really trying to bring it home for people. Yeah. And do you guys have any more questions?
I kind of just was wondering, like, so you've now been in this for like 10 years. Like, how do you like stay excited every single day about like your company? Because I guess that's a huge part of like doing it, is like you have to be so passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I guess like that's a big question is like, do you just like wake up every morning and you're like, oh my God, yes, this is like what I love to do? Or are there some days where you're like, oh my God, maybe I should like move on to something else or what?
That's a really good question. I think that definitely ebbs and flows. Like for sure, there's no single person who just wakes up every day and is like, yes, like another day. Like I think that and especially like over 10 years, you know, I've gone through periods where the thing for me is I've actually never had a job. Like I told you my life history, like there's no period in my life where I had like a job at Nike or something and I like miss my like corporate like benefits. Like I know some other people who have done it that way and it's a different experience for them. They feel like they're losing something. Like I lost my big salary or like, you know, these different things. So I never felt that loss because I never had that. And so for me, part of what makes it easier, I think, is that I don't know any other way. Like I set up my life in such a way where working for myself or creating businesses was like a part of my DNA. Like I don't know life without it. So that makes it easy for me to not worry, like, should I be working at Nike right now? But I would say that doesn't change the basic fact that your enthusiasm ebbs and flows. There are some times where you're like, what am I doing? I mean, I ran for 4 years of my life, like 4 years, like that it cannot be redone. I spent every moment of my like, you know, working productivity on a fabric dye that develops its color in the sun. Like it is cool, all right? Like I'm the first person to say it's cool. Like there's a reason I worked on it. It is awesome products. You can also imagine as like a creative person who has lots of ambitions and goals, like that takes a lot of stick-to-itiveness because it's very specific. So you have to, but also as you can see from my story is that at different junctures where I felt like I'm running out of steam on this certain thing, I switched it up. I changed what I'm doing. Like what I'm now spending every day doing, like I'm working with, we're working to build this online platform where people can order custom packaging and things for their own businesses. And it's because I decided that is something that is like a next challenge I'm excited about. And I just got to call it Lumi and like roll it into my new idea because I control it. But basically, in essence, it's a new idea. And it's because there's only so long I could only do GoDaddy. So you have to know when to give yourself like a new challenge, basically. But it definitely, your enthusiasm ebbs and flows. And on those tough days, you have to you do two things. Like you grit and bear it a little bit, or you give yourself a timeline. I'm very fond of giving myself timelines. Like if I'm still feeling this way or frustrated in a month, I need to figure out a solution. Or if a month passes and I'm not, then I go, okay, I was just in a bad mood. Like you have to be your own boss. When you don't have a boss, you have to come up with your own methods of being your own boss and like checking back in with yourself, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, I had one last question. I guess for a lot of kids like on campus, like the big thing is like the risk and like the possible failures and everything like that with starting a business. So like how would you go about making sure that maybe like the risk you're taking is one that you could definitely have a reward down the road and not be sort of naive to think that you can take this huge risk and then not really have it planned out? You know, how do you balance that risk versus, you know, making sure you have your homework done on that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I find I'm definitely not an advocate of taking like extraordinary financial risk or something where you're just like, there are times in every business where you're sort of doing that, but you know yourself to know whether you're just being foolish or you're like taking a calculated type of risk. I find that the most types of risk that people are actually afraid of are like social risk. You tell yourself like, oh, I don't know what this will do to my homework or like my future job prospects or something. But that's like the dialogue you're telling yourself when in reality you don't know what people will think of you if you do the thing you want to do, and you're afraid of being embarrassed. You're afraid of launching a Kickstarter and it flopping and having to explain that. So those are usually the like risks that underlie what people are talking about. And And there's no recipe for just like making that go away.
Right.
But there's all of those things like fortune favors the bold. Like if you're not willing to put yourself out there, you know, there's like so many sayings. It's like, you know, you miss 100% of the shots you didn't take, like yada yada yada. And those are all true, you know. And so I think it's you have to kind of figure out a way to craft a persona for yourself where people, like the best thing I feel like I did early on, and this is just like really silly advice now, I don't even know if I'm helping, the thing I feel like I did for myself early on was like by just doing weird stuff, like starting a t-shirt business, and it was never even that successful, like just like going to California, selling stuff to a couple random stores, whatever, is that people started to be conditioned to expect weird stuff from me. And so now, like, I get zero pushback. Like, I'm going on Shark Tank, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Like, no one's like, oh, like, what are you doing? Like, because I'm always doing that stuff. So I think it's important to, you don't have to be like that necessarily, but it's important to realize the difference between whether you're scared about social risk or whether you're scared about like financial or like very serious, you know, kind of consequences. And if it's social risk, you need to find a way to like make your life fit around the risks you want to take. Because the sad fact is like most people don't do that, and you're gonna blink and you're gonna 20 years will pass by, and it just, risk is a muscle. If you don't flex it early, people tell, like when you hear someone say like, I'm going to get a job, put money in the bank, and then start a business, that is 100% false. They probably will not do that.
Right.
So, you know, risk is a muscle, and you should, even in little ways, like it's not bad to take a job. I'm not painting that perspective whatsoever. Jobs, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who've had amazing jobs and learned a tremendous amount, but don't tell yourself a false narrative. Like, just, you know, try to be honest with yourself. That's the best part of, you know, getting used to risks, even in small ways.
Awesome. That's pretty insightful. I didn't think about it that kind of way.
Cool. I hope this was helpful. Anything else? I'm so glad we could make this happen today. And if any other specific questions pop up, like, you know, just let me know. You guys have my email. And other than that, like, I'm happy to try to do something for a larger group at some point if you guys want.
That'd be great.
That'd be so awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon, guys.
You too. Bye.
Bye.